So initially I said I was going to lead some questions. That was a lie because clearly my colleagues have shown how conversant they are with one another in their talks that I let go on too long because they were so engaging. And so now we want to hear what questions you have because I'm sure you're just, overwhelmed with so many thoughts. So we have microphones at either end down here. If you cannot come down to them, one of my colleagues, Idren or Ranald, can bring them up to you. So I believe we have about 15 minutes for questions before we get to a real break at 3:30.
What is that?
All right. I see which he can start.
No, I'm manning the mic today.
And I'll remind folks, since we have a lot of questions, keep your questions short and sweet, please.
Yes.
Hello, thank you. Hello, there we go. Thank you. Could you all briefly talk personally how this has made you think about your own, how you identify after doing all this research and being scholars, but how do you as a person in the world now see your own identities?
I could say I was born in the country that doesn't exist anymore, so but well, I guess what the research has told me about my own identity. So I was born in East Berlin, just to clarify that, East Germany. I guess I feel European to some extent, but what has this research has told me is that we're all interconnected in some way through migrations and through our history. So I don't put a label on myself. That's just me.
I celebrate my three components: African, Spanish, and Taíno. But I highlight my Taíno, especially in the community. So yes, I celebrate all of them.
So as I was coming through graduate school, I tried out all those analyses, tried them out on myself first, and it was exactly what my father told me. So not a big surprise, but it was still fun nonetheless.
Thank you all for being here and for your work. I actually found out about this event through my mother, who always said that when she was a university student, professor, a hematologist, I guess geneticist, took photos of her because she had a Taíno profile. So when we found out about this event, trying to find out if that research ever went anywhere, she was like, well, if you go to the museum, let me know if you see any pictures that maybe look like me. We found out that we think the doctor's name is Norman de Castro, and I was wondering, for a civilian like me, and I'm sure a lot of people here who are interested in their past, where would you go, or where would you suggest that you go to find information about, your ancestry? And these, like we were saying in an earlier sessions, records aren't necessarily kept. If someone's work, their research didn't make it into like a, peer-reviewed paper, like what could you do to try and kind of locate that information?
My initial reaction is go ask your grandma. Go ask your family. If that information isn't there, perhaps there are scholars that might know. The internet is full of all kinds of crazy things, so be very careful on that. And ideally, if there are records or archives you are willing to go through, a lot of this actually is on the internet. You can sit down and look at it. You're a young person. I don't want to be, rude or anything, but there's also books. I know young folks like everything to be digital.
But if it's unpublished work, do you think that would have made it anywhere?
Sometimes you can find them in archives. Like I recently, looking at my own family history, there were slave registration records of the English-speaking islands. These censuses were taken at the turn of early 1800s. That's online now. That wasn't online 10 years ago. So sitting down and sorting through that, which previously was unpublished. So there's a lot of sources out there. You could try and shoot emails to people. There are a variety of they're citizen scientists, so lay people that do genetic genealogy and are very well versed in the science as well as genealogical research. And there's organizations, you can actually look them up online and maybe contact them and they can orient you, given your own family histories as to what you want to do.
I might just add in this context that there, of course, are lots of companies out there that will sell you a genetic test for $100 or more to tell you who you are. And I would just encourage you to be cautious about taking what they say, just because it's their interest to provide more certainty than perhaps really exist in these data. And there are lots of limitations that we could talk about for a long time to the data sets and the way they make those inferences. And so that's just something to approach with caution.
Thank you again.
Well, first off, welcome, and secondly, go Pirates. My question is, I have a history in both genetics and bioinformatics, and I wanted to get more involved, both understanding my culture and also the genetic aspect of it. And I was wondering if you guys could steer me in any sort of direction, maybe.
We can talk after. What is it?
So one plug that Deborah and I can also give is we're involved in the summer internship for Indigenous peoples in genomics that's been going on here in the U.S. For 6 workshops. Had started in Sing Aotearoa in 2016, and we just started Sing Canada this last summer. And so that's especially the U.S.-based one, which is focused on ancestry, is a good way to connect with scientists and other native indigenous peoples that are interested in genetics.
Thank you.
Just 2 quick things. My question is, what sets apart contemporary DNA with ancient DNA, and how does autosomal DNA research play into it?
Great questions.
Yeah, great questions. So the term ancient is a little bit arbitrary. It kind of conjures up, like deep time, but really it's more to do with the fact that it tends to be degraded, and so once an organism dies, the repair mechanisms stop, and so the DNA tends to degrade, and up to a point where there might not be anything left. And so we call ancient DNA, really anything that's degraded and therefore hard to work with, and modern DNA from DNA from modern populations. How does autosomal DNA play into it? Well, I guess very simply, Jada was talking about these uniparental markers, mitochondrial DNA. You can look at the maternal line, or Y chromosome being the corresponding marker for the male line. Autosomal being then nuclear DNA, so all your ancestry, the rest of the chromosomes that I showed, basically. And it tends to, mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome DNA were used extensively and are very informative because you don't have to bother with things like recombination and things that complicate things a lot, so they're good population genetic markers. But they have some limitations, and so if you look at genome-wide, like a full genome, you have a lot more power, a lot more data to work with, and you can draw other types of inferences. That's what I'd say.
Autosomal ancestry will also give you some windows into broader ancestry, not just, a bigger fraction of your ancestors.
Hi, thank you for coming and being here. It's very interesting. I'm a Cuba Rican, and I've had my DNA taken. And we were surprised by quite a few things. We were surprised about the A2 halotype that we were Native American. It doesn't really say Taíno or anything. We were surprised by also that we're Ashkenazi Jewish. And then I found out that there are a lot of people from Puerto Rico especially that have. And why don't, my grandmother wore white and killed chickens. She was Santeria. So I don't know, we never celebrated the Jewish part, so I don't know how that came to be in our DNA. And is that common in Caribbean DNA?
Yes,
Yes.
That's for sure. But maybe not necessarily Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry, but ancestry from different parts of Europe that you might not.
But it's a
expect.
religion, you know, so how has that become part of a DNA as a religion? You know, they don't have...
So I think this comes back to some of these questions about labels and what
Okay.
names we put on DNA. That label that someone has told you this is Ashkenazi Jewish DNA is not at all necessarily connected to religious practice, religious beliefs. It's simply that they identified some of those stretches of DNA that come from your body also being in individuals who identify as Ashkenazi Jewish today. So what they're really identifying is that you have relatives somewhere in the world who identify in that way and share related DNA with you. Whether that means that your shared ancestors identified as Ashkenazi Jews may or may not be the case. We don't necessarily know. And I think the other thing to keep in mind here is that our own identities, our own religious beliefs, may or may not map onto the DNA in our bodies. That identities are something that are very complicated, religious beliefs are very complicated, and that may not be tied to that genetic material.
It's interesting because family history does speak about having, you know, Jewish ancestry in Spain that came to the New World because of the Inquisition.
Yes.
So I was wondering if that played a part. In probably a lot
That
of
very well
that.
could. And that's why I think it's really important as we look at these kinds of genetic information to contextualize that with what we know about our family histories to what we know from other sources of information.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have time for one more question.
So much pressure. Hi,
We'll still be
everybody.
around.
My name is Rebecca Gitana Torres, and I'm a child of Borinquen, manifested in Brooklyn, New York City. My question is really, I think, maybe a question, but also something for maybe many of us have been thinking about, particularly women or people who are looking to create families and thinking about the quote-unquote genetic preservation. Many cultures across the globe have done so, been very particular about creating these bloodlines. What can be said about those of us from the Caribbean who may feel very strongly about wanting to further our genetic history, cultural history, because it is all, even spiritual history, and how that can even translate, I feel, and many people might feel through what we pass down to our children genetic-wise and other.
I guess for me, I would say that when I think about our identities, our cultural context, that those are things that are not simply rooted in our DNA, and so regardless of who you marry and what or reproduce with, whether or not marriage is involved there, whatever that genetic material looks like, that heritage, that identity, that's going to come from who you are, what you do, how you relate to others, the communities and sets of people that you connect with. That's not going to come from simply having DNA.
I want to thank you all for your interest, for your very brilliant questions that we can, of course, continue to engage with via email, via conversation outside of here, but we need a 15-minute break, people. So, mil gracias. Thank you.
Let's give our panelists another round of applause. Thank you so much.